I have been super excited for the ray-tracified version of Half-Life 2 since it did a seductive little dance at us about 2 years ago now, I think at this point. And it's finally here! Well, at least the demo's here. The thing is though, I watched the trailer a couple days ago, and there's a bit in it that got me a little bit worried. This is gonna bring a 5090 to its knees, isn't it? Well, I don't have a 5090, so what I thought I'd do instead is start off with a 4060, a graphics card that's apparently very popular at the moment, and then we'll play around with different configurations. But let's start here. Straight off the bat, we have about 70-ish frames per second. This is running at 1440p on a 4060, and it feels a little input laggy, which is interesting. Like, that frame time graph is doing weird stuff. Oh, it is... This looks like Stalker 2! What in the world? Wait, okay, no, let's bring the... Before I just start complaining, let me get the settings up. So we have a DLSS preset on, and there's frame generation happening. That's so funny. The moment I started it, I was like, wow, there's some input latency here. And it's because frame gen's happening. That makes sense. Why would they not default it to the transformer model? The transformer model looks way better. Oh, look at, like, you can just instantly tell that. And when I A-B'd between it, it crashed. I think it's really smart for them to have launched it as a free demo first, so that people can interact with it without having paid like $90 for an experience like this. I think this is a good play on their part, because this is a technology that's really difficult to implement well from what I've seen. And yeah, this way it's not as infuriating. And again, this is a like small community development team. So this is also one of those situations where, you know, they're kind of allowed for it to be pretty janky and broken. But it's still really interesting to see how the technology works out. Gonna do transformer model. As you can tell, it already looks way better. Like, even... Okay, never mind, the grass still very much has that aura around it, but it does look a lot sharper. Look at that texture quality, that's amazing, and it's all the way up here as well. There is quite a lot of glitching going on, which is less exciting. But now that we're in the light, I want to go back here because I feel like this is very aggressive DLSS. So I'm going to just do balanced. It looks way better. But yeah, it must have been using like at least performance, because we've lost quite a lot of frame rate here. Let's see what happens. Alt-X. If we turn frame generation off. Oh wow, it's at the cost of slightly more latency. Very good. We've dropped to 30 frames per second now. Wow, the textures on the gravity gun are really epic. Look at that. Oh, and the like bit of tape that keeps the gauge on. That's a really nice bit of attention to detail there. I like that. Oh yeah, I want to turn that off. I don't like chromatic aberration and vignette and stuff, because to me, the game needs to look real, not like I'm looking at it through an old Soviet lens. But yeah, we're looking at 30 frames per second with balanced DLSS. What if we do quality? 24. And at this point, we still have upscaling artifacts like around the gravity gun and stuff. You know, there's that kind of haze, that like aura. At which point I realized I needed frame gen on for the game to look playable, even if it still felt like dog water. Oh yeah, look at the shadow. Nice and blurry, very good. Oh, and then the way the shadow sits, that's pretty sick. I like that. But right after being disturbingly excited by the violence, I noticed something weird about the lighting engine. Is it just me, or do the explosions not generate light? Like, it's kind of unsettling somehow when there is some ray tracing happening, like with the glow of the gravity gun, but then like... Yeah, the explosions make no light. That's a bummer. The lighting engine has a real uncanny valley vibe to it, where some of it looks really good, but there's a bunch of really obvious glitches everywhere. That looks so brutal. At which point I decided to try some 1080p. So 1080p quality with no frame gen gives us about 40 frames per second here. And this is with the low preset. So let's turn it up a bit, because this preset doesn't impact frame rate too much. So we're looking at about 39 frames per second at 1080p using quality DLSS, but without frame gen. And then when you turn DLSS off, you drop to 25 frames per second. And as is the case with a lot of modern games, everything starts looking really weird. But then I went back to quality settings with DLSS, and honestly, the game felt fine. It is not a terrible feeling 40 frames per second. Like some games, even at like 50 frames per second feels bad, but this is usable. Next, I dropped an RTX 3050 6GB into the system, which did not go well. As you can tell, it's really unhappy with the 6 gigs of video memory that we have in here. And then we're gonna have to do performance, I'm guessing. We don't get the option for frame gen because it's a 30 series card. At 1080p, using performance DLSS and a low graphics preset, 24 ultra performance. We've got a render resolution of 640 by 384. So here, it's playable. Although in person, it does kind of look like the game's rendering in 1974. Okay, so if you want the game to look worse than the original, then yeah, you can play it on a 3050 6GB. Next, I dropped a 5070 into the system to try out the new uber fancy frame gen. Whoa, so this is 1440p, and we've got quality DLSS, which at 1440p isn't even 1080p, and we're getting 54 frames per second. That's wild. This is wild. This is with a brand new graphics card. So what I'm curious now is what happens to the latency when we turn this on. So we'll start with 2x. Now at this point, I had NVIDIA's latency overlay up in the right-hand corner, but it didn't show on the screen capture. So when I read it out, that's where I'm getting the information. And our latency has actually increased despite us getting double the frame rate. It does look a lot smoother though. It's so weird because my mind correlates high refresh rate with low latency. So being able to feel the input latency with the smoothness of the higher frame rate it's weird. It's causing dissonance in my brain. But when I turned on full shareholder presentation mode, the dissonance got even worse. 165 frames per second. But we're getting more latency, so the latency's actually jumped up to 64 milliseconds. To put that into perspective, at native 30 frames per second, you're getting about 33 milliseconds of latency. So despite the fact that the game here is running at 160 frames per second, your inputs feel like they've been binging on whiskey and Benadryl. And as I progressed through the map, the latency got even worse. 80 milliseconds. So I'm gonna turn that off. And then it dips to 44 frames per second, but we've actually got lower latency. And then I turned the rendering preset up to ultra, which had an interesting effect. Hey, the explosions actually make light now, but very weirdly. And I don't think it's the explosions, I think it's like the ember. And then when I turned frame gen back on and got further into the map, the latency got even worse. Now we have 90 milliseconds of latency. It feels so bad. It looks really smooth, but this feels so bad. Because the game is rendering at 30 frames per second, between 30 and 40 frames per second. That's our base latency. That's where we're starting out. And then because the frame generation adds latency on top of that, it's so weird feeling because it looks very smooth, but then it's laggy as hell. And with that shocking result, I decided to get even more shocking and try out an RX 9070, which should be interesting considering that the game doesn't support Fidelity FX. So my RX 9070 that I bought almost 2 weeks ago at this point finally showed up. I'm very excited about it. I've dropped it into the system and it's not going great. Because the game doesn't support Fidelity FX and it absolutely needs upscaling to run on any level, we're getting 9 frames per second. What's really funny about the 9 frames per second though is that the latency isn't that much higher than it is with the 5070 running at over 100 frames per second, so yeah, I mean, it feels about the same, to be honest. I then dropped TAAU down to performance, which had a wild effect on the visuals. Wow, that looks shocking. Look at that. Whoa. Whoa. And after trying out all of my best wow sounds, I decided to give the biggest daddy graphics card I have a try. The 4090. Okay, so now we have the second fastest graphics card in the world in this system. Let's see what it makes of this demo. 54 frames per second running natively at 1440p. And then obviously, because it's a modern game, it looks terrible without DLSS on. So let's turn that on quality. So at 1440p with quality DLSS, because that's the highest quality setting we have available for some reason, we're getting less than 80 frames per second. But look at the latency. 12-ish, around 13 milliseconds. It's only at 70 frames per second, and it feels miles better than it did on the 5070, running at like 160 frames per second. I then turned the render preset to high, which dropped the frame rate to about 60 frames per second. And the thing is, when your base is 60 frames per second, the frame gen thing is gonna feel a lot less terrible because you're working with a reasonable frame rate, right? So if, for example, we go back here, we enable frame gen, which is just the 2x frame gen because it's not a 50 series card, it's still 50 milliseconds? Wow! The frame gen adds so much latency. So I immediately turned it off again. But yeah, I mean, with the 4090 in here, it's running fine. It's running at 60 frames per second at 1440p with DLSS on. Yeah, so basically you need 400 watts of power draw to run this even reasonably well. And now that I had a setup that could run the game decently, I played the entire content of the demo, which was about an hour and a half of gameplay. And my main takeaway was, wow, the original Half-Life 2 visually holds up very well by modern standards. I like the way that your bullet casings don't smear coming out the side of your gun. But according to modern games, that smearing is very realistic, and well worth the lighting engine shivving your graphics card in the kidneys. I'm clearly just stupid for liking the clarity. Which brings me to the end of the video. I'm very curious about your opinion on this mod. Let me know down below, subscribe on your way down there, and until the next video, thank you for watching. Bye bye.